everyone. Welcome to this week's Investment Trends, where we discuss the latest news in the stock market and the economy. So for this week, there wasn't a ton of earnings reports. We also didn't see a lot of economic data come out. But one of the things that we wanted to take the time to talk about today is something in the stock market that's been making a lot of headlines and generating a lot of buzz, and that is around the IPOs that could be coming so far this year. So what we are looking at this year is a wave of IPOs, and this is a historic moment for the market. But first and foremost, wanted to talk about what an IPO is. That is an initial public offering. So for the first time, these companies would now be available to regular investors listed on an exchange, either the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, and they're readily available for people to go in within brokerage accounts or investment accounts and buy these stocks online. So now anyone would be able to invest in these companies that had become very popular over the past couple of years. And the reason why this is generating a lot of buzz as of recently is these companies are required to release what's called an S1 report. And most recently, we did receive one from SpaceX. And this S1 report talks about some of the revenue, some of the expenses, some of the losses that the company might have, and gives us some true insight into what's behind the numbers and what's going on with some of these businesses. John, from what you're seeing and reading about, from a big picture perspective, why does this moment in time seem so different and so historic?
Yeah, we've never had three companies IPO in this quick succession at this magnitude. SpaceX is expected to be valued at $1.2 trillion when it begins trading next week. Additionally, looking towards September, OpenAI is looking at $1 trillion valuation at IPO, which is really, other than SpaceX, unheard of for an initial offering. And then people think that Anthropic should be looking towards late October for their IPO, and their latest valuation was at about $900 billion, up from about $325 billion in early 2025.
Yeah, so truly some historic numbers. I mean, right now there's only a handful of companies that have that $1 trillion valuation. And so to dive in here and to get a little bit more details, we wanted to start with SpaceX. Obviously, that one has been had the longest runway from what people have been talking about. There was rumors of it possibly IPOing last year. Elon Musk with his marketing ability and obviously on paper being listed as the world's richest man. This one seems to get the biggest headlines. So what were we able to gather, and what are some of your thoughts around SpaceX as this is becoming eminently becoming public?
Yeah, looking at that S1 full year earnings for revenue for 2025 came in at about $18.7 billion, with over half of that coming from Starlink. They've shown solid growth year over year, especially in that Starlink space, which is great news. But at that $1 trillion valuation, that's about 96% price to revenue. Pretty solid revenue, even at a rich valuation. I'm sure people saw that XAI was rolled in via merger to SpaceX in the past couple of years, and that is kind of where the issue for SpaceX comes in. It's burning about $2.5 billion a quarter.
Wow. Yeah, so obviously something to keep an eye on, and like you mentioned, if you're purely looking at the numbers of this, 2025 revenue of $18.7 billion, and yet they're saying the company could be worth $1 trillion. It's wild from a fundamental standpoint to try to make some sense of the valuation of this, and ultimately what could lead to a price per share for a company like this. We mentioned Elon Musk before, and he's obviously, what we've been able to gather from him has been through Tesla, because that's obviously a publicly traded company. He is on their earnings calls, and he's able to glean insight into that business, which could be a great feature, obviously, for SpaceX. There's a lot of people that believe in him and will back him. Large institutions, hedge funds, large portfolio managers, they will, invest in Elon, no matter what he's doing.
Yeah, and if you want to get involved in SpaceX, you better be ready for that, because even though he only holds about 42% of shares,
Yep.
he holds 85% of the voting power in the company.
Wow.
With that, a lot of times IPO is a liquidity event for early investors.
Yep.
And while that may potentially have some price action on the broader market, seeing money flow out of SpaceX into other things, Elon actually was able to kind of push through a change in some of the index regulation, and SpaceX will be available to large indexes 15 days after IPO. So
Wow.
we should expect to see that rolled into a number of indexes almost immediately.
Yeah. Important to note, if you have S&P 500 funds or whatever that might be within your 401k, you could be an investor in it that way and take advantage of what is out there and possibly some of the price appreciation. With all that, expect a lot of volatility. With SpaceX. Just this week, Blue Origin, which is obviously separate, that's Jeff Bezos, rocket company, had a rocket explode on the launch pad, right? So there's a reason for this. There's a reason why they're trying to raise a lot more money. An IPO is a great time for the company to try and raise money. Might not be the best time to invest your own money into these businesses, but they are very capital intensive, obviously, and a lot of risk involved with these. So make sure that if you're looking at SpaceX in particular, you're factoring in some of those risks. And then that leads to kind of the next company, which Elon Musk was recently in court against. But we have OpenAI. And for many people, this one, it seems a little bit odd. OpenAI was originally started as a nonprofit. And now, obviously, with an IPO, they're trying to be a for-profit company. Most people, if you don't know what OpenAI is, you probably have heard of ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is it was formed through OpenAI, a large language model system, something that it really caught people's attention as a tangible tool or a representation of artificial intelligence was ChatGPT. So, what are your thoughts on OpenAI? What are some of the news headlines around that?
Yeah, with OpenAI, ChatGPT was really the first to market, at least to the general public's knowledge, out of these LLMs. And with that can be a great position because you kind of grasp that market share from the get-go, but you're also playing defense while trying to grow. Looking at OpenAI, very consumer-facing.
Yep.
They brought in $25 billion last year, but they're losing about $1.22 for every dollar they bring in. Something that, with a lot of these AI companies, that there's kind of a competition to drive everyone else out on cost.
Right. And it has, like we mentioned, caught a lot of headlines. There were some big early investors in OpenAI, Microsoft being one of the largest investors in OpenAI. And what we have seen from some of these public companies that are investors in it is them continuing to show losses for their OpenAI investment. Obviously, with an IPO, that would be a large capital infusion and could lead to some very steady returns for those early investors, which are some of the largest publicly traded companies that we have here in the U.S. Obviously, they're in a little bit of a battle with Anthropic, just given the similarities in some of their products and their use cases for large businesses. And timeline on that is a little bit unknown. They did file a confidential S1 back on May 22nd, so could be any time really within the next 6 weeks or so. And then that brings us to the third company that has hinted at, has given the notion that they are looking to IPO this year, and that of course is Anthropic. And this one might be, it seems to have, early in the year kind of been in the shadows a little in the background, kind of, playing behind the scenes, so to speak, and then really made a big splash when Claude came out, and the ability that Claude has to code things and write software code, all of these different use cases for it, knowingly some of their relationship with the U.S. government as well, has really kind of thrown Anthropic onto the public stage and started to catch a lot of eyeballs and a lot of attention.
Yeah, and a brief correction. I said earlier that $380 billion to about just under $1 trillion was since 2025. That was actually since February 26. So that's enormous growth in a very short period of time.
Yes.
Yeah, the wide belief is that we'll be looking at an Anthropic IPO towards the end of October. They, like you said, coming in a little bit later to the game, have really attacked the market. They've done great on the enterprise side, especially looking at that Claude code, bring some software development in-house. For a lot of large corporations, that's been an initiative after they've seen their SaaS subscriptions climb and climb and climb.
Yep.
And I think that opens up some great long-term possibility for Claude. I don't think that'll wipe out software development completely, at least for the time being. People are going to want some level of human oversight, but it can certainly automate a lot of those day-to-day tasks, and that could be a real tailwind for Claude.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, there's the customers of Anthropic are pretty numerous, right? I mean, 8 of the 10 biggest companies in the world use Claude, which is their product, and it's being, the adoption rate on Claude and Anthropic continues to grow, but still has so much upside ahead of it, which is why people are becoming very, very bullish on this. You've probably heard major companies, CEOs, Mark Zuckerberg, all the way to other CEOs of large companies saying that we truly need to dive headfirst into this and try to get as much AI adoption as they can. And a lot of them are leaning into Anthropic and leaning into Claude.
Yeah, and Anthropic's been a lot more focused than some of the other LLM groups over the last year, with their investment going into both Claude Code and development of better models, where you saw with Google Gemini, Nano Banana, kind of a goofy offshoot. They've kind of quietly cut that back and really gone back into the core of their LLM.
Yep.
Similar, OpenAI, I believe it was called Sora. It was like their AI video development application, and that's been completely cut out. As they've lost market share, they've kind of realized we need to be the master of this LLM domain if we're gonna survive and thrive in this environment.
Yeah. So, John, what would you say for listeners out there, or possibly investors? What should they be thinking about during these times, or when they hear news about these IPOs?
Yeah, I think there's good opportunity out there. I think that if you're thinking about investing in one of these companies, it's a new business model specifically to public markets. I think you need to educate yourself as best as possible on how the businesses work, how they make money, and what the future might hold for them. I think if possible, dive into their financials. If that's something you're not comfortable doing, I would advise to speak with a financial advisor. And additionally, it will probably need to shift around the risk makeup of your portfolio. We're going to likely see some volatility across the broader market as people try to free up cash to put money into Anthropic and OpenAI and SpaceX. So I wouldn't be too shocked if we see, a couple days in the red coming up, because people are going to be looking to free up money. There's a lot of excitement, and with that, you could additionally see some opportunity in other companies that you might like, but you haven't loved the price. Could be a good buying opportunity elsewhere.
Historically, what we've seen that 12 months after the IPO date, on average, is typically a better time to buy into the IPO. Keep in mind one of the reasons why these companies, and the main reason really for these companies to IPO, is to raise money, right? I mean, that's purely the reason, because this is such a capital intensive field. Artificial intelligence, there's large expenditures, which we already have seen from the publicly traded companies that have such high CapEx numbers that are priced into artificial intelligence. So keep that in mind. These companies, like we mentioned, they may show losses, they may take big hits, and that is very common. And just because there is a high valuation and they're worth a lot of money, it does not necessarily mean that they're safe. So there's something to consider as well. There are other companies that are, I would say, suppliers to, OpenAI, SpaceX, Anthropic, and could be a good opportunity to look at some of those as well. This is not a recommendation, but there are a couple of names such as NVIDIA, Amazon, CoreWeave, Broadcom. These are already stocks that are currently trading right now that, as a byproduct to these three companies receiving a lot more of cash, could be a good place to look at, good stocks to look at as investments, as they may see increased business or increased orders from these three companies. Like we mentioned, make sure if you're looking at some of these IPOs, you are very aware of the risks that are involved with them. Make sure that you consult with someone if you're thinking about looking at these things. And as far as today goes, that's what we have. We appreciate you joining, listening in. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. The content of this video is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing presented here constitutes investment advice, a securities recommendation, or solicitation to buy or sell any financial instrument. The views expressed are our own as of the date of this recording and are subject to change without notice. As financial professionals, we may hold or manage client accounts that hold positions in the securities and companies discussed in this video. Those positions can change at any time. All data and information referenced is sourced from publicly available materials believed to be reliable. However, accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed, and past performance is not indicative of future results. All investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. This content does not account for your individual investment objectives, financial circumstances, or risk tolerance. We encourage you to conduct your own due diligence and consult with a qualified financial, legal, or tax professional before making any investment decisions.